On today's podcast, we're talking about 5 habits of dysfunctional culture. What are common elements that keep dysfunctional cultures trapped in mediocrity, or even worse, dysfunction and toxic cultures? And so this is a warning to all listeners. Do the opposite of the habits that we're going to talk about on today's episode. Welcome back to The Thermostat with Jason Barger. If you're currently on a commute, a walk, or just a micro break in your day, glad you're making time to step back, to think, and to reflect on the next steps on your journey. I've never been more convinced the best leaders and team cultures in the world are the ones that make time to step back, breathe in good oxygen, and calibrate their thermostat. I hope today's conversation leaves you feeling grounded and inspired. Now let's dive into today's topic to engage our minds and hearts in order to authentically lead and create compelling cultures wherever we are in the world. Hey everybody, it's Jason and welcome back to the Thermostat Podcast. Wherever you are and however you're coming to the podcast today, welcome in. So glad you're here. We got over 200 episodes, so many great things, great topics that will add value, contribute hopefully to your mindset and to your life and your work. And so many great things. So if you are new to the podcast, welcome. So glad you're here. Hope you'll go back and check out some of those old episodes because really, really great stuff. And I hope you'll dive in and continue to be a part of this. And those of you that have been with us from the beginning, so glad this continues to add value to your life and to your work. My commitment to you every time I do this is I want the things we're talking about on this podcast to hopefully engage your mind and heart, help you step back, help you think about the culture that you're trying to create in your relationships and your team with the organization that you serve. And it takes intentionality and commitment to do that. And so my hope is that this breathes in as some good oxygen to you. And so glad that you are here. So before we get started, if you'll do me the quick favor, if you will rate the podcast 5 stars, hopefully, leave an authentic review in your own voice. Those are the 2 main ways that this helps other people find it. So if you can rate the podcast and leave a review in your own words, that's really, really helpful. And then obviously every time you share it with other people, hey, people on your team, throughout your organization, your life, hey, this is a topic that I think will resonate with you. Share it on social media or whatever's authentic for you. Every time somebody does that, it helps spread further into the world and those networks and helps amplify these messages. So thanks for everybody that takes the time to do that. Habits are powerful. Habits themselves, the habits that we form in our life, in our work, our relationships, the habits we form are powerful and they send messages about what we value, about how we show up, how we approach different things. Sometimes we form habits without thinking about them too much. And other times with intentionality, we can begin to shape new habits of the way we think about something, the way that we then begin to form a new habit or a new mindset around something, which leads to better action. So habits are powerful and they send messages and help shape the way that we experience different situations. We've talked about in the past the concept of what we allow lingers and what we teach triggers. And if you listen to some of the past episodes, because I talk about that in culture shaping all the time, that what we allow lingers and what we teach triggers. And we've been talking about what are some of those habits or stories that great cultures share. And we've referenced things like the 7 habits of highly successful people and teams, by the way, that Stephen Covey introduced years and years ago. And I shared my reflections and observations on some of those habits, but then how they relate to the world that we live in today and the habits that great cultures and great leaders form in order to help perpetuate a future culture that they want to be a part of. So great cultures and great leaders and great teams, they perpetuate not only great stories like we talked about on last episode, but they also perpetuate great habits. They know that part of culture shaping is continuing to recognize those items that they are allowing to linger, those habits, those operations, those behaviors that are counter to what they want, and then be able to identify them because none of us are perfect. No team and organization is either. And then identify those things that are lingering, and then begin to teach a new habit, a new behavior, new form of operation. So great cultures perpetuate not only great stories, but great habits, and they recognize that the process of shaping culture never stops. We're always setting the temperature, but we're going to have to be breathing good oxygen and shifting our habits. On the same way, dysfunctional cultures in teams, they perpetuate dysfunctional habits, that they don't address those things that might be lingering. And they actually fall in the pattern of repeating dysfunctional habits and dysfunctional stories that they tell. And cultural dissonance begins to happen because their words and their actions aren't aligned, and they keep perpetuating a dysfunctional culture. So habits can also be detrimental when the habit or practice is one thing that doesn't bring out our best or keep us in a downward spiral or a compromised position. So habits can also be detrimental if, again, not aware of the habit that's leading us in the wrong direction. So on today's podcast, we're talking about 5 habits of dysfunctional culture. What are common elements that keep dysfunctional cultures trapped in mediocrity, or even worse, dysfunction and toxic cultures? And so this is a warning to all listeners. Do the opposite of the habits that we're going to talk about on today's episode. But before we dive into today's topic, let's pause, take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Hey everyone, I want to take a quick minute just to remind you about one of my favorite days of the year that is coming up on Friday, November 3rd, 2023, for Thermostat Cultures Live. This is a powerful day of development that I host, and an opportunity for us all to step back, take a deep breath, and calibrate our thermostats for the road ahead in our own leadership roles, our lives, and certainly with the cultures that we are creating. This year, it's a hybrid event, and there are limited seats available for the in-person VIP experience in Columbus, Ohio. That's right, it's a really cool in-person VIP experience in Columbus, Ohio, as well as there are online virtual seats available for those who want to engage from a remote location. As always, I'll be joined by amazing thought leaders from around the globe, and it will be a day you won't want to miss. So visit thermostatcultureslive.com, thermostatcultureslive.com to learn more and to reserve your seat or seats for your entire team. So we know this, that habits are powerful, and we know that strong teams and cultures have positive habits and behaviors and operations that support the future that they're trying to create. And they continue to work on those habits and strengthen them and recognize the thing that brings out the best in them. And they continue to breathe oxygen into those habits, behaviors, and operations. We also know, not only from study and research, but also observation and times when we've known maybe that we personally have fallen into, more areas of dysfunction or habits that are not good for us, or certainly as teams and organizations, we know this, that dysfunctional or toxic cultures have poor habits, or they get into a rut with habits or behaviors or operations that are counter to the culture that they want to create into the future. Or they get stuck in a, quote unquote, this is the way we've always done it mentality, where they just keep repeating the same patterns, and the patterns aren't bringing out the best in them, or even worse, are toxic and negative and blame and kind of perpetuating these habits, behaviors, and operations that don't bring out the best in us or really anyone within the culture. So as I study and research and also experience compelling cultures, that I'm lucky to work with teams and organizations and leaders that I support, and where we're actively trying to identify those behaviors and build up and breathe oxygen into the good things and the vision and all the values and everything that we're trying to create for a future culture. I also come across habits or behaviors that are common occurrences with dysfunctional teams or cultures. And it's easy to spot when we start to recognize, okay, here is what a great and positive and high-performing culture looks like. And it's easy then to be able to spot what a dysfunctional team or culture looks like. And research and study would back it up as well. So here are 5 habits that dysfunctional or toxic cultures often share. And the habits that dysfunctional cultures perpetuate have these attributes in common. Again, all of them do them a little differently, but they all dysfunctional cultures perpetuate, these kind of habits that have these kind of attributes to them. One, they tend to focus on the job over the person. They focus on the job over the person. And again, if you quickly hear that, say, yeah, but the job's important. And that's why we're here, to actually do a job. I get it. I know that. Of course, we're here. We've come together to accomplish something. But when people in a culture feel like the job itself trumps their experience as a human being, things begin to slide into dysfunction. And so hear this clearly. The job is important, and so is the mission of the organization. Absolutely. You will hear me say that over and over again, and I am an advocate for that we have to, if we have a mission, our job is to be the best at it in the world and continue to strive to raise the bar on how we show up to accomplish that mission, no doubt. But dysfunctional teams and organizations, you can see that they clearly begin to value the job over the person, and people within the culture begin to feel it. An example of this that's played out right in front of all of us is the Great Resignation stats. If you just look at that over a period of 2 years, 48 million people up and left jobs. And oftentimes, again, we're still making our way through, and there are a myriad of different reasons why people left jobs, but so much of it often had to do with people not feeling valued, don't feeling like they belong, don't feel like they're being cared for and they're contributing to something that's compelling and that they're a part of creating into the future. And all of a sudden, people begin to kind of go find places that in the studies around what are they looking for, what has come back is they're looking for more meaningful cultures where I'm valued more than just my job, but as a human being that brings my gifts to help serve that job. So dysfunctional teams and cultures often focus on the job over the person, and they also focus more on what over how. What over how. And what I mean by that is in dysfunctional teams and cultures, too much emphasis is placed on the what over the how. So, and what I mean is too much emphasis on what is it we're going to go do? What is it we're going to go do? And the what. What is the action that we're going to go do? And again, what we are going to do is important and critical, but too much focus on what we are going to do and not enough focus on how we are committed to showing up together, how we work together, how we collaborate, and the culture of not just what we do, but how we do it that we want to create. And so dysfunctional teams and organizations oftentimes get so overloaded with the what are we going to go do that they don't spend enough time committed to and then paying attention to how we show up to do the job and the culture that we create between human beings. Too much what over how leads to dysfunction. The third dysfunctional habit that I'll point out, and this one may seem like Captain Obvious, but dysfunctional teams and cultures have a 0.8 to 1 ratio. 0.8 to 1 ratio. I'll explain. The Gottman Institute in Seattle, they taught us this through their research behind the 5 to 1 ratio that healthy relationships and teams exhibit. As they studied, healthy and positive relationships in teams, the research came down to the teams and the relationships that were built to last, they would exhibit a 5 positive interaction to every 1 negative interaction. And simply put, the research tells us that healthy relationships and teams catch each other doing great things and do that on a 5 to 1 ratio. And in doing that, the focus on the great things and noticing what others are doing, they earn the right then to talk about those items that need to be improved. And yet it stays at about this 5 to 1 ratio, that we're more positively identifying the strengths and the things that we're doing well and earning the right to then talk about the areas of improvement. On dysfunctional teams or dysfunctional relationships, what their research shows is that they tend to have about a 0.8 to 1 ratio, which means 0.8 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction, which means their focus is more on catching people doing things wrong or incorrectly or pointing out the faults than actually acknowledging the positives. Their eyes and their focus and their mentality goes on what's not working before and more heavily weighted into what's not working than what actually is working. So dysfunctional teams and cultures have negativity swirling around them more than they do positivity and progress, and they get trapped in this kind of 0.8 to 1 ratio, which has more negative interactions than positive interactions. So it's not rocket science, but as they study the healthy teams and organizations and the ones that actually continue to have sustained progress and development, they have about a 5 to 1 ratio, 5 positives to every 1 negative. The fourth habit that I'll recognize that dysfunctional teams and cultures perpetuate have the attribute of avoidance. Dysfunctional teams and cultures or relationships may point out the negatives, but they avoid the truly genuine, impactful feedback conversations that I talked about on a previous episode. And they avoid the conversations they really need to be having. They tend to skirt around the issues. They tend to point fingers and place blame on others, but avoid any true, courageous conversation that's rooted in progress. They also avoid accountability as a two-way street. Unlike healthy teams and cultures that I've talked about in the past that recognize they are partners and co-creators for the culture, meaning it's a two-way street between, leader and contributor, or whatever role you play across the company, that we are all partners and co-creators in that culture. And in dysfunctional teams and cultures, they see that it's very much a top-down. It's not a two-way street. It's kind of a one-way street. And so it becomes this kind of avoidance of true conversation and both parties not feeling like they're pulling in the same direction or that they are co-creators for the future. And avoidance leads to disconnection. Eventually, relationships, teams, organizations that are on this path of avoidance, that chasm between them continues to get wider and wider the further they go, and eventually it leads to a disconnection, a disengagement, and certainly dysfunction. Lastly, the attribute that I'll talk about of a habit of dysfunctional teams or cultures is there's a lot of talk without action. Talk without action. Dysfunctional cultures talk a good game, but do not back it up with action. They preach about all the things they're going to do, but then they don't have the follow through. They may have a really great, important meeting where they identify all these things they're going to do, and then they walk out of the room and they avoid it, and there is no follow through or commitment to, wait, those things we said we were going to do, did we not show up and do them? They talk a big game, but people within the culture begin to distrust what will actually happen. And actually what you end up seeing is that within then the meetings or the organization throughout teams is that people start to distrust that the actual meeting or the conversation we have is really meaningless. And so the words become cheap. And when leaders or cultures continuously talk about things that don't lead to action, it begins to deteriorate the culture and the words become hollow. So I'll leave you with some questions to ponder for today's episode. What are the positive habits, or what are positive habits that you are perpetuating? The positive ones that you're perpetuating within your life and your work? And what are, those things that help bring out the best in you and others? What are they? What are those positive habits? Let's recognize those again in that 5 to 1 ratio. And then what are those dysfunctional habits that might be creeping in or present in your life individually, your team, your organization? What are the dysfunctional habits that might be creeping in or you might be allowing to linger and present an opportunity to change? What are they? I hope today's episode got you thinking in many new ways, and if a deeper dive into any of these topics is helpful, please email us, info@jasonvbarger.com, info@jasonvbarger.com, and we'll continue to design content to reach you where you are and hopefully continue to add value to your life and your work. Lastly, I'll just remind you to go back and listen to old episodes. So many great topics, so many great conversations I've had with other thought leaders and stuff that will add value to your life and your work. So cheers to you, cheers to us on the path ahead, and to remember that the future of leadership is you, is me, is us. We have the opportunity to get clear on the temperature that we're trying to set individually and collectively, and then to be courageous and committed to breathing oxygen into the mindsets and actions that will sustain us for our path forward in our relationships, on our teams, throughout our organizations, whatever that future is that we're trying to create. So step back, remember, be a thermostat, and breathe good oxygen. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, and I hope the messages and questions stimulate positive change along your path. As always, if these messages resonate with you and add value to your life, I hope you'll help amplify them throughout the world. Please rate, comment, and share on whatever podcast or social media platform you're using, and share this podcast with the people in your life or work who should be part of these conversations. That way, this spirit does, in fact, spread. If these messages or developing leaders and culture would be helpful to you and your organization, please contact us at jasonvbarger.com, jasonvbarger.com. And remember, we are all ambassadors for the culture we want to create in our life and work. We have to own the vision we want to be a part of. The future of leadership is you, is me, is us. Be a thermostat.